This is on teaching Scala to the Statically Challenged. My name is Rebecca Ely. I am a software engineer on the Spark platform team at Bloomberg, which means that I use Scala to write tooling and infrastructure to support Spark adoption across Bloomberg. Now, it's a little hard to see, but I'm really curious to know who here wrote code in at least one statically typed language before learning Scala. Yeah, it's a whole lot of the room. Who here had not? Anybody? Okay, nobody. Just me then. Who here taught Scala or has taught Scala, is currently teaching Scala to someone who hadn't done any statically typed languages? Yeah, that's a lot of people. And who here anticipates that they'll be doing that in the future? Great. And who here is just interested in this topic and has been going to every teaching lecture all day? Great. And who is here because they're in the wrong room and they're about to head out? All right, 100%. Great. So yes, as you may have guessed, I myself came to Scala statically challenged, and we'll get a little bit more into what that means in a few minutes. First of all, I want to clarify there are a lot of awesome talks about teaching Scala at this conference. Many of them are focused on taking complete code newbies from zero to Scala, and I'm really excited about those talks. This is not one of them. This is a talk about teaching Scala to folks who are already coders, just from a more non-traditional background, as I like to call them, trailblazers. Now, this room, what I can see of it, is clearly some Scala experts. We are in the expert track. We are at a Scala conference. And while the Scala content of this talk should be accessible to anyone who's seen Scala before, the goal of the talk is really to address some of the challenges that come up when you are teaching something that you yourself have so much expertise in that you don't necessarily remember what it was like to be a beginner. Now, speaking of expertise, my background is in teaching. Most of the jobs that I held before transitioning into tech were teaching in English, in Hebrew, in mathematics, in biology, and most relevant for today, in synchronized swimming. And you may be wondering, why are you here at this Scala conference and not in a classroom right now? And the extremely simple answer is it's summertime. Most American classrooms do not have students in them. But the real answer is that while teaching was really interesting and conceptually I got a lot out of it, day to day it wasn't the sort of challenges that motivate me the way that the challenges that I've found in tech do. And so we are not here for me to bully or sell you into a life of Scala teacherhood. This is not about converting you to a new career. This is about making the mentorship opportunities that you choose or have chosen for you more rewarding and easy on you and on your mentees. So let's talk a little more about what we mean by trailblazers. These are coders who come from less traditional backgrounds than your average CS graduate into tech. I personally joined Bloomberg straight out of a boot camp where I had learned Python and JavaScript. I knew absolutely nothing about C++. I'd written a single FizzBuzz application in Java, and I had never even heard of Haskell. This is one of the industry's largest growing pools of talent. And we're talking about boot campers, we're talking about data scientists, we're talking about students who took a few courses in computer science and really enjoyed themselves but didn't have time to go back and do the full major. People who are self-taught and find languages like Python or Ruby a really easy way to get into coding. And of course, web developers, folks who have a lot of JavaScript experience and just not much statically typed experience. These are people that you have hired because they have great projects that they've written. Maybe they have some relevant technical experience that's going to be of great value to your team. They probably have some great communication skills, or they generally have a whole lot of gumption and can bring a really cool mood to the team and some great energy. Now, when I started at Bloomberg 2.5 years ago, all of the beginner resources that I could find for learning Scala assumed knowledge of at least one statically typed language like Java. They would introduce concepts that I had never even heard of, or even slide right past those concepts with phrases like unlike in Haskell, or any ref in Scala corresponds to object in Java, which means that I had to learn about object in Java and learn enough Java to understand where object was coming from before I could begin to understand the concept that I actually needed to move forward in my Scala study and work. And while I have seen this situation getting better over the past few years, I do still see this gap of resources that are accessible for non-traditional beginners as as sort of the lowest hanging fruit of what we need to address to bring more and more diverse engineers into Scala. And as teachers and as mentors, it falls on us to mind this gap as we're helping to bring people into the fold. Now, I can hear you all thinking, Ely, clearly you are magnificent. Bloomberg is so lucky to have you, and I wish we could hire 10 of you. But why should my team be bringing on folks like this who don't even know public from static? And I have one really big answer for you, which is take a look at this job board from a couple of years ago at Scala by the Bay. On the left side, we can see the 20 people who were looking for work at this conference, experienced Scala devs. And on the right side, we can see the 50 companies and teams that were looking to hire one or more Scala engineers. There's clearly a disconnect here, and there's clearly some room for us to try new strategies to bring people in. On top of that, some of the benefits of bringing these types of people, specifically these junior engineers, onto your team are, for you, it can be extremely rewarding if you enjoy teaching, and even I do on occasion. You also get a chance to learn through a beginner's eyes. As they say, the best way to learn is to teach. Your team will be bringing on diverse experiences and perspectives, and studies have shown that more diverse teams make better decisions and are more effective. You also get a chance to mold them in your image. Now, tell me, who here has opinions about Scala? All right, well, now is your chance to turn those opinions into facts for someone, and they won't disagree with you. For the entire Scala community, you could be bringing in your next favorite Scala dev. Personally, Kelly Robinson. We also will get the benefit of the silly questions that only a beginner would ask. They question assumptions that all experts take for granted and can find, wrong assumptions within that. Also, the more silly questions that there are out there on Stack Overflow, the easier it'll be, the lower the barriers to entry for the next round of folks who are learning Scala, which means that a few years from now, when you go to hire some new Scala devs, there'll be a much wider pool of people to hire from. Now, I can tell, you're with me. Novices are great, but I need to remind you, there are a few gaps in what they know that you will be responsible for covering. And here are some tips from my experience learning Scala, and also as I've started mentoring and as I've talked with folks who have had these mentoring experiences. These are not here to blow your mind. They shouldn't shock you. But it's really about calling out the things that either really helped me as I was learning or some places where I stumbled that my experience could have been better. Number one, first day when they get to the office, ask them how they like to learn. Personally, for example, I like examples. Other people will really want to read the entire docs before they start working with a library. Other people will want to get a quick lecture on whatever it is. And this isn't about, turning into a teacher and spending all of your time becoming their greatest teacher. This is really about not wasting your time on approaches that will be less effective and result in you having to repeat yourself and find new ways to explain the same things. That said, Asking the same questions more than once is not a bad thing. It's how we learn. We need repetition to grasp concepts. And so you should definitely encourage your learner to ask questions. Let them know that you don't see basic questions as bad questions. And also let them know that you would rather they come to you with questions than maybe go to Stack Overflow, where they may get the right answer. They may not get the answer that fits your opinions about Scala. And while this can sound a little scary, like, am I opening myself up to be, their Ask Jeeves 24/7? Like, really, a large part of encouraging questions is letting them know how you would like to be bothered. Would you like to get emails when they have questions that they need you to answer? Would you like them to write them all down, and then every couple of hours you'll check in and make sure that they understand everything? You do get the chance to set some boundaries, and they will appreciate knowing that they're not bothering you by asking the questions that they have. Next is try to have the conversations that you do have, and the times when you're assigning work or explaining something they don't understand into dialogues, not into monologues. If you start ranting and then find out that you lost them 20 minutes later, well, that's 20 minutes you'll never get back, and it really doesn't feel great for them, and it's not going to feel great for you, and you'll be lucky if they let you know that you lost them 20 minutes earlier. Or I came to Bloomberg having spent 5 weeks building out a recursive backtracking algorithm to generate dance choreography. And so recursion was something that I had been teaching to other people in my cohort for weeks. And then when I joined Bloomberg, I'm starting to learn functional programming, and a few people took it on themselves to explain recursion to me without asking first if I had encountered it before or not. So that, was a waste of time. That was time that could have been better spent explaining something that I hadn't encountered yet that they didn't think to explain to me. On top of all that, the value of having a dialogue instead of a monologue is that when your learner is speaking to you, they're giving you an understanding of their understanding. So you'll be better in tune with what it is that they still need to learn, or with what they've already understood, which can help you to set better projects for them and further their learning more effectively. Finally, don't mistake vocabulary ignorance for conceptual ignorance. What I mean by this is having a map explained to me in Scala was, again, sort of a wasted time exercise, because all I really needed to be told was a map is like a dictionary in Python, but with stronger rules about key and value types. And so that could have been some time saved, and I definitely want to save y'all some time. Now, as far as providing structure and support for your learner goes, do not say, oh, Odersky has a great course on Coursera, go do it, and then leave for 2 weeks. The problem is not the course on Coursera, although I have some recommendations for other resources that might be a slightly easier starting place. The problem is leaving for 2 weeks, because on day one, and this did happen to me, the feeling is like, yes, this is so great. They have so much faith in me. I'm getting paid to learn. I have all this autonomy. And then by day 3, it was like, why won't anyone talk to me? And so you want to have a stronger hand in what your learner is learning and make sure that they know that you're there for them. And it doesn't have to mean, all day, every day for the first 2 weeks, you're just sitting in a room together teaching things. It just means that you should check in more frequently and make sure they know that you're there if they have questions. Do dig up resources for your learner. They got the job. They are coders. They know how to find resources. The issue is with finding the right resources. I remember a time that a coworker said, map would be a great thing to do here. So I went and spent an hour trying to figure out how I could possibly fit a map data structure into the code I was writing, when what my coworker meant was, use this method called map. This is the sort of thing that you can avoid if, instead of saying use map, say use map, I'll find you an example, or use map, let me go get the docs for you, or something like that. Another suggestion I have is to set project timelines. This is not about being mean and saying if you don't do it by this time, you've failed. It's about giving your learner, who doesn't have a lot of context for the sort of things that you're asking them to do, an understanding of how big the scope is of what you're asking, and a better clue for when they should come to you and say, I think I've gone a little too far in this way, can you help set me back on track? For you, it's also a really good way to do some sort of forethought into the appropriateness of what you're asking your learner to do. One final thought here is that you should introduce your learner to the community, that is meetups or conferences or just going out for drinks with your Scala buddies, as early as possible. A, because it helps to speed their learning. They're encountering new concepts quickly. They're getting the same concepts that they've been learning at work in a new context and with new explanations, which is a really great way to learn something well and like solidify understanding. You are also reducing the workload for you. You're providing them more people that they can go to when they have questions about a concept. You're also, making it look like you have friends, which is not a bad thing. Final set of suggestions, never say the word just. There's a very cool boot campy, but for all skill levels, organization here in the city called Recurse Center. And this is one of their rules that I really love is don't fake surprise. The idea is that if someone, asks a very basic question about, a main method, you don't respond with, you don't know what a main method is? Because that's extremely mean. You're not setting them up to want to come to you with the basic questions that they really need answered in the future. And you're losing the chance to share with someone the excitement of figuring out how to work with main methods. Saying just falls in the same boat, where if you say, oh, well, as this example that I found earlier online is, you just need to use the normal option handling methods. Well, if I don't know what the normal option handling methods are, then I'm not going to come to you for it because you clearly think that I should know what it is. And I'm sitting there feeling bad about not knowing what the normal option handling methods are. So you haven't given me useful advice, and you've set me up to not feel great about our interactions going forward, and to not feel great about my knowledge base. Speaking of setting someone up to feel great or not, create positive expectations. Studies have shown that if you say this will hurt before you do something painful, it actually causes someone's brain to feel more pain. I was recently in a training class, a week-long Scala training, where the instructor opened on day one by saying, Scala is an extremely difficult language, and there's a lot of really complicated things that you need to learn, which didn't set this class of very experienced developers up to approach the language with enthusiasm and to see themselves as, capable of learning Scala easily. Also, on top of that, the advantage of coming to Scala without 10 years of Java experience is that these junior Scala developers will not have a lot of the preconceived notions that can make some concepts in Scala more confusing. Concepts like functions as objects were much easier for me to pick up on than some of my colleagues who had a lot more experience in Java and in C++. Model good code. This means, writing tests, writing great names for your methods, adding examples and readmes, and if you're really fancy or if you're that sort of person, comments. These are all the things you should be doing anyway, but in addition to making your code so much easier for a beginner to start working with, you will be showing them examples of what it is that they should write their code like, and you'll get more great code out of them in the future. Finally, do not mistake inexperience for incompetence. I went in the space of a few months from never having heard of JDBC to being my team's go-to person for anything Spark SQL data sources. And if you've hired these people who've done this impressive thing, come into tech through a non-traditional route, usually with a lot of work, a lot of extra work that you maybe even didn't have to do, or a different kind of work than you had to do, they're quite capable. All you need to do is give them the resources and the support to succeed. Now, let's talk a bit about what makes a good first project for someone like this. Now, by first project, I really mean first few projects. I'd say I had somewhere between 3 and 5 that I'm really drawing from to come up with these guidelines. I found that the very best project that I worked on as a very new Scala coder was writing unit tests. They're very quick wins. They're quite short to write, so I can't fall down any very deep rabbit holes. It was a great way to get an introduction to the library that I then went on to contribute to, and to contribute to in ways other than writing tests, of course. And it was a chance, and tests come with this sort of built-in understanding of whether you're doing something correctly or not. It was also really great for the mentor, who then didn't have to write those tests but still got them in his library. Next best are partially complete small projects. So with a partially complete project, you, I assume, have thought through how the entire project is going to be done, and it's less about making large high-level decisions that your coder doesn't have the context yet to make effectively, and more about filling in the blanks in a way that you can guide very effectively because you've already done part of the project and have a good sense of where it's going and what's going on in it currently. After that, I would say some ideas that could be good but are not my favorite would be something like warm-up exercises, where yes, they've got that nice containedness that writing tests has, and often they're very easy to tell if you've done something right or not, but your coder isn't contributing to your code base right away, and that's lost time for you and also a lost chance for them to really feel like they are getting involved and get experience with your actual code base. Small projects can be good, but without a lot of guidance, you are leaving decisions up to someone who hasn't seen enough to make the decisions that you would make yet. So if you do, if that's the best you can offer your beginning coder, try to be very involved with the planning and have very regular meetings to ensure that they haven't fallen down any deep rabbit holes while you weren't looking. Some projects that I have found are not great, some of them surprisingly, some of them pretty obvious. Surprisingly, dependency upgrades. This was one of the first things I was asked to do when I switched teams into a big new code base that I had never seen before, and I had never worked with Maven before, and this was a Maven dependency upgrade. And it broke. First of all, I had to understand Maven and the code base and the dependency I was upgrading and all that stuff just to make this tiny little upgrade. And then those few tweaky things that needed to be fixed after the upgrade were things that I had no context on, and I needed so much support on that it definitely would have been faster for the person who asked me to do it to just do it themselves. Behemoth projects are not good for some of the reasons that earlier things we mentioned are good. Very big projects, oops, a little preview. Okay, very big projects will offer lots of opportunities for your learner to fall down extremely deep rabbit holes without your support. And generally, if it's an extremely big project you've asked them to do, it's really several smaller projects that you haven't thought through how to break down, and so you probably haven't thought through where things could go wrong or what it is that they'll even need to do to accomplish the projects. Bug fixes, this is another surprising one. Just because it's fast for you does not mean it'll be fast for your learner. They'll probably need a lot of context to start. Oh, I'm doing that. Okay. I don't know. That's very exciting. All right. So, okay. Yeah, so bug fixes, not great because while they're fast for you, they will take your learner a long time to do if they're not familiar enough with the code base to know where they should jump to address what's going wrong. And if they haven't seen the kind of errors that are coming up before, then they'll have to go and learn what those errors mean before they can figure out how to fix them. Finally, concepts that are new to you. This can get very dangerous because if you don't know what it is that you're asking them to do, or you don't know how they can accomplish what you're asking them to do, you can't provide great support when they run into an issue and need some guidance. Now, Of course, eventually, after they've done several projects, it will be time to give them larger projects, or to have them go and fix some bugs, or to have them go and, figure out something that you're not sure how it's going to work yet. When that time comes, just be extremely upfront about it, because it'll feel great for them to be, the pioneer on the team who's figuring out what needs to happen and learning something that you don't even know yet. And when things go wrong, they won't feel as though they are not able to do something that everyone else has figured out. Now, let's jump into some even more Scala-specific ideas. This is a quote said to me by a friend when I found out that I was going to be working in Scala. He said, "Scala is a language created by academics. It's very clever. Don't try to get every funky feature now. Focus on the basics, and the funky stuff will come in time." And this turned out to be great advice. One of the complaints that you occasionally hear about Scala is that there's 6 ways to do everything. It allows for a whole lot of exciting ways to do unexciting things. And coming at it with this mindset will allow your learner to sort of shut the fire hose off, or at least really reduce it to a trickle, and will be good for you to remember that this is someone who has a lot to learn and doesn't need to learn all of it at the same time. So with that in mind, here are some topics that I particularly recommend emphasizing when you're teaching someone from this background Scala. Number 1, types and type signatures. Also tools, and by tools I mean a single IDE, a single build tool, a single test lib. If you want them to be working on Chris build tool, do Chris build tool. If you want them to be working on Bloop, go for Bloop. They can't question you. All that said, if you are a hardcore bare bones Emacs or Vim user, please let them start on something like IntelliJ. A more fully featured IDE was instrumental in giving me, helping me to understand my code with types on hover and all of these great things that just come out of the box. You should cover FP basics with them. These are concepts like what is a side effect, or write val, not var. And you don't even have to tell them var is an option. Just say we write val when we do this. For, not while. Things like that. Very actionable, concrete things that will be simple to explain and will be exactly what you want them to be using when they code. Vocabulary. Object, class, trait, method, type. I'm sure some of these were extremely straightforward for you to understand when you got into Scala, but for me, some of these were more complicated, and I needed to have them explained a few times because my understanding was just fuzzy, or I didn't have as much background to draw on for those. Compiler basics, like what is a compiler? Or between your compiler and your IDE, get prepared to have your life be so much less buggy. Stuff like that. Finally, options, I think, are pretty important to introduce very early on. Now, with this slide, and I know this is the most controversial slide of the talk, I'm not telling you that you should not teach these things. And I'm not even telling you that you should not teach these things right away. I'm saying wait until your learner has a specific need for whatever this concept is, whether it's implicits or currying or anonymous functions, case classes, recursion, compiler intricacies, functional programming vocab. So, you don't need to know what a monad is or be able to describe it to use a flat map correctly, I know that these are extremely important concepts in writing Scala and even in writing pretty basic Scala, but they don't need to be introduced immediately, and your learner will get a lot more out of it if you wait until they encounter it in the code and they ask a question about it, or they have some code. For example, I had case classes explained to me probably 4 times in my first few months at Bloomberg, and I knew enough to see them and recognize what was happening, and find them good, but I wasn't writing them into my own code, and I didn't really care about them until the day that I submitted a pull request that had some code that had a type signature that looked like this all over it. And a coworker commented with, this would probably be a good time to use case classes. And I spent 10 minutes and I figured out how I would do that. And my code looked so much better. And now I'm really into case classes. But that wasn't something that came from the enthusiasm of my mentors. That was something that came from my own experience with how these concepts could make my life a whole lot easier. So they have a whole lot to learn. Wait until learning this stuff will really matter to their ability to work on the code that they're working on. And after they get the basics down, we've all experienced this, you go from appreciating what it is Scala can do for you to getting a little geeky about the concepts behind Scala or the concepts behind functional programming that elevate you to the next level of doing it because I love it, not doing it because I need it. Let them get to that place, and they will follow along and want to have these conversations with you. So I'd like to break for any questions. I believe we have some time now.
Thank you. Hi.
Hi.
So it seemed to me, and I could be wrong, that you're aiming your suggestions at mentoring, individuals that come on board as they come on board, one by one, not necessarily, bringing on board entire teams or a bunch of people at once.
Yeah, as I mentioned, diversity makes for great teams, and if you've got an entire team of people coming from this non-traditional background who have sort of the same gaps in their knowledge, that's actually not a diverse team anymore, and so you'll run into probably not the same problems, but similar losses of effectiveness and of great idea generation as if you have a team of all experienced people who know exactly what they're doing and never ask those sorts of questions.
So I do a lot of Scala mentoring at my workplace.
Great.
And one thing I noticed didn't appear on your teach right away or your wait until a need was the future.
Yes.
And that is something that I struggle teaching. And it pulls in, it's hard to teach futures without implicits because you have the execution context and so forth. Do you have any advice about?
I would definitely put them in the wait for the need category. And if you find that what you're asking your learners to do because of the nature of the work that you have for them is requiring futures very early on in their instruction, then definitely go for it, because that will be a time when they will get a lot out of how you explain it because it's going to be critical to the work that they're doing.
Hi there.
Hi.
I was wondering if you could comment about kind of the vocabulary we use in the relationship between the person who's teaching and the person who's learning and who we're interacting with. There's there's senior and junior and mentor and mentee, and I don't find that it captures kind of what's going on. So I don't know if you have any advice about that.
Could you say the question again? I think I'm with you, but I want to make sure I'm answering.
Yeah, I kind of ended poorly there. Do you have some advice about how we talk about our roles and what we call each other? So if someone is new, are they a junior? I don't know if I would want to be a junior, but I'll be a junior if I'm a junior, sort of, and that works between myself and the teacher.
Sure. So this question probably comes up less for me than it would for many folks, because at Bloomberg we don't tend to use titles at all, which can sometimes get confusing when I'm talking to folks outside the company about what I do. But it's not an insult to say junior, right? I will happily accept the ways that I am still a junior, still learning, and being senior doesn't mean not learning anymore, but there is a lot of it can be helpful to say, this is where I'm at in my learning, I want to know more from you. And if you're working with great people, they won't see someone being a junior colleague, especially someone who comes from a non-traditional background and is maybe actually older than whoever it is that they're learning from, as I have been, as someone who can't teach anything, right? Just because someone is junior doesn't mean they don't have other experience they can bring into the situation. So I guess one part of my answer would be the labels like junior or mentee are not insults, and I think it'll be pretty rare to find someone who feels that way unless they do have extensive relevant experience, and it's not an appropriate term to use with them. But also you can always default to something like colleague or teammate, and for all that I have learned a lot about Scala from my teammates, I've also taught them a lot about things like Git or about how to write emails to coworkers who are pretty flaky and don't seem to want to get back on that urgent issue. So yeah, I guess I would say it just hasn't stressed me out much, but I can definitely see where you're coming from about why stuff like that can get sensitive in spaces where the label actually comes with, some level of seniority or compensation or respect, things like that. Be respectful of everyone is really how I would answer that question, and demand respect from everyone.
Hi. I teach swing dancing, by the way.
Awesome.
So I'm one of those trailblazers. I come from a world of complete hacking and doing really big things. And I've struggled because my degree's in business. And a lot of the stuff up here, it's kind of hard it has been hard for me to get my head around. I'm getting it over time, I've been doing this professionally for a year now, but how do you teach somebody this if they've never seen it before? Like I still don't even know what implicit is, kind of. I know what it is, kind of.
Yeah. So as a learner, I think for me personally, asking for examples is really the way to wrap my head around what it is that these things do. Just getting them explained to me doesn't give me everything I need to feel like I understand them. And then of course, when they come up in your work and you're using them yourself, that's a great time to build a solid understanding. But mostly for me, I've been really lucky to have fallen into the SF Scala community as thoroughly as I have, and have a lot of people who I just consider friends now, who are people that I can go to and say, so actually I asked a friend last night, so what is Scala written in? And he was able to give me a great, tailored to me because he knows me very well, explanation of how a programming language is written. So with more complicated topics like this, the best advice I can give is make friends who you feel comfortable asking the same questions over and over again until you really get it, and ask them about times when they used it and how it was useful for them. When it comes to teaching these concepts to other people, small words, question whether you need to use a piece of Scala vocabulary or if you can explain it in a way that someone who had never learned any Scala, even if you're talking to someone who has some, in a way that someone who had never seen Scala before and just had some bare bones programming experience could understand. Yeah, that was helpful.
Hi. In your examples of bad first projects, some of the reasoning that you used was that the person who asked me to do this could have done it a lot faster.
Yes.
But sometimes that's going to be just a fact of life, I suppose, when you're mentoring someone. And I'm wondering how you decide between when to make that trade-off.
For sure.
And then if you notice the person has realized this fact and maybe it's getting them down, that they know you could just have busted out, so why have you asked them to do it? How would you deal with that?
Yes, those are two great questions. As far as making the trade-off between you could do it faster and giving them experience, the great thing about something like writing tests is there's not actually that much trade-off time-wise for simple unit tests, and the time that goes into something like that has much less to do with figuring out how to solve the problem and much more to do with figuring out the small piece of the code base that you're writing the test for, things like that. I don't recommend, whether or not it's a thing you want to do, often people find writing tests tedious. I'm still not there, but writing tests is really exciting when you're first starting out and it's I made a thing run, I am adding to this code base. So that's, whether or not you want to do it isn't a great determinant, but you can sort of try to figure out the ratio between how long it would take you and how long it would take them, and aim for things that fall a lot higher on that ratio, I guess. Aim for things that where it's a much more even ratio instead of, you know, a more unbalanced one. If you do find yourself in a situation where you've asked someone to do something and it hasn't, they've fallen into a rabbit hole, or there are just too many concepts that they need to learn, and you either want to take it away from them, or you just want to reassure them that it's not their fault that this thing has, you know, grown beyond what your expectations were. I recommend, first of all, pair programming, which I have a fun little extra slide about. I recommend just sitting down and say, let's do this together. Next time you'll do it by yourself. Let's wrap it up right now. Or, you know, just saying, this ended up being more complicated than I expected. My bad, sorry about that. We'll next project I give you will be one that's a little better suited to what I've already taught you, things like that. Hope that was helpful.
Hi, I saw you had a link on the last slide, which I'm excited to check out. I'm also wondering if you have other recommended resources for these types of learners.
Yes, so you have gotten ahead of me, but I'm really happy you did. The link up at the top is started out as a collection of resources that I found as I have been learning Scala. That is what that do seem to be well suited to someone who is coming from a background more like mine, a non-traditional, non-statically typed background. And I even have them ordered and sort of like, start here, then you'll be ready for this one, then you'll be ready for this one. So I would love for you to hand that off to any learners in your life and contribute to it if you have contributions. Also up there is a slightly out of date, but soon to be in date, write-up of this talk. So if you have, if you know someone else who's about to start mentoring, that could be something you hand along to them. And again, I'd really welcome any feedback or contributions to that.
Right. We're coming up on time.
So you mentioned people who don't use IDEs.
Yes.
So I use a text editor and SBT. And the problem that I have, the main problem I have is that when I tell someone to use something like IntelliJ, and they go ahead and try to install and all that stuff, the project like never loads cleanly, and even when it does, there are like weird errors that don't exist when I build it with SBT and all this other stuff, and I don't know how to use the IDE, so I cannot help them through this process.
That's entirely fair. I've been through.
Yeah, is there any like, do you have any advice for that?
This is a good time to turn to Google. Also, if you have coworkers in the office or friends in the community, folks who are more experienced with IDEs, good time to go to them and say, hey, could you help out? We're having some environment issues. Eventually, your learner will become the expert on your team at using this IDE, and then you'll go to them for advice on things. But it may also be worth your time to, you know, spend one day working in that IDE environment to get a feel for it, so that you can be the first resource that they come to for simple questions about how to work with it. Oh, okay. Looks like we have to wrap up, but I'll be standing outside after this, ready to talk more with y'all. And I just wanted to finish by saying, first of all, Bloomberg is already always hiring. We have some great jobs in Scala that you could fill. I hope you'll all come away from this with the understanding that I don't expect you all to be full-time teachers after this. It may feel like it takes, you know, effort and takes time away from your other priorities to focus on bringing folks up to speed, especially when they come from these non-traditional backgrounds, and you have to figure out more about where they are coming from to work with them. But in the long run, putting more intentionality into it now and really thinking through how you're going to work with them will smooth this ramp-up period for them and result in more effective and more grateful coworkers. So thank you all for coming.